No Mark Willard today. It's Mark Grandi alongside Dan Dibley. Mark Willard will be back on Monday. Happy Friday to everyone out there. It's a nice day in the city. Hope everyone is gearing up for what should be a fun weekend. I want to hear from you guys all afternoon long. We're chatting with Aldon Smith coming up in an hour at 4 o'clock. Former Niner, put together the best 3-season stretch that a pass rusher maybe has ever had as a San Francisco 49er. He was key in the Niners' success, and he played on the same defense as Patrick Willis, who was being enshrined in Canton as a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame this weekend. That's coming up tomorrow. And Dibs to gear up for that ceremony, seeing Patrick Willis going to the Pro Football Hall of Fame at Canton. Jim Harbaugh, his former head coach, chartering a flight to take him, Navarro Bowman, Delaney Walker, some other former Niners all the way out there to Canton to see Patrick Willis, the leader of that defense, the leader of that era of Niner football, really the first player who kind of changed the culture of that era of Niners football. To see him go into the Hall of Fame, it's good to see Harbaugh, who's now head coach of a different team, and checks notes. Pretty busy this time of year. Yeah. Take off a day to fly out to Canton to watch a great go into the Hall.
That's
pretty cool.
Awesome. Yeah, very cool. And that gives me a little bit more of a thought of points for Jim Harbaugh for having the perspective. And he's a guy who loves his team, and he's always been a player's coach. But to take time out of his own camp, and I know we're not exactly deep into camp where you're getting ready for week one and all the rest of it, but to have that thought, to take that time and get Delaney Walker and other great members of that team and fly out there and support P. Willie, that's awesome. It's good to hear.
If there's anybody who thinks that this week of training camp is the most important week on the face of the earth, it is Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh thinks every day of every second of training camp is the most important moment that he's ever lived. So the fact that he's willing to take off at least a good portion of a day to fly out there, and let's see, it'll be, of course, Navarro Bowman, along with Jim Harbaugh, Mike Upati, Deshaun Goldson, Jonathan Goodwin, Will Tukuafu, and Delaney Walker will be on that jet rented out by Jim Harbaugh.
Perfect.
It's awesome
and
sight.
Yeah, and a lot of memories. And you think back to the Super Bowl year of 2012, which culminated in the Super Bowl in 2013. And, we were actually out there. I was doing a show called The Rise Guys at the time, and 95.7 The Game was in its relative infancy. And our PD at the time, Jason Barrett, decided that he would fly the whole team out there. And so every show, we went out to New Orleans, and
That's awesome.
We spent the week, and we did shows at the media center, and we went out to the convention center, and ultimately we went out and had the press conference, what they always do with the Super Bowl halftime performer, which happened to be Beyonce. And I remember sitting in that room and watching Queen Bee walk in, and everyone's like, everyone had their phones out, and the cameras are clicking, and Beyonce's taking questions, and it was like, oh my God, this is incredible. The Niners, New Orleans, the Super Bowl, and then, of course, the power goes out, and they kind of gave them new life in the second half, and they were so close, part one, to winning a Super Bowl, and now here we are, 3 Super Bowl losses later, and it feels like they've been so close, Mark, 3 different times, and they just can't. They haven't been able to get over the hump.
Maybe. I mean, this could be a storyline as we get further on into this coming football season. The Super Bowl again this coming year, New Orleans.
Yeah, good call.
The same building.
And I wonder if our PD now will send all of us out there.
Yeah, Nahigian, you listening?
Matt Nahigian, yes. And back then it was 4 shows. It was mornings.
Yeah, so you don't have to send as many people out there.
Yeah, there was 2 midday shows, and there was an afternoon show. It was Rise Guys, and I'm trying to remember. And in the midday, they had a show. I can't remember their names. And then the afternoon, we're getting a no.
Stop talking about it. Move on.
No, it's a no as far as him sending the entire station. So there you go. Maybe one show. Butcher and Vontae got to go to Philly, so maybe it's the afternoon's turn.
Yeah. Well, they were also at this past Super Bowl, which was awesome for them.
Very good for them.
I was a little jealous.
Totally. And, Steiny and Goo got to go to Vegas, so... Willard and I got to go to Linden to recruit.
How'd that work out?
to try and get Aaron Judge to come to the team. Whatever. I would love to have them get back to New Orleans, but just thinking about Aldon Smith, and you mentioned Harbaugh and Justin Smith, and of course Colin Kaepernick, and Kendall Hunter and Frank Gore,
Kendall Hunter,
Michael Crabtree, and all the other names. It just brings you back to another time when the Niners were so close to getting it done.
Yeah. Yeah, stories that I'm sure are going to be shared on that flight as they all head out to Canton, Ohio. I would love to be a fly on the wall inside of that plane that Harbaugh is renting and chartering out to get to Patrick Willis's Hall of Fame enshrinement at Canton tomorrow. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait to hear his speech and what all the others say about him as well. But thinking about Patrick Willis and his career and what he meant to the 49ers and those shortcomings in the big moments, that Super Bowl loss, the 2 conference championship game losses, the first one to the New York Giants, which felt like, oh my God, are we on this stage? Like, this came out of nowhere. I can't believe we're even here, but it still ended in heartbreak. And Kyle Williams muffing that punt, fumbling that punt.
God.
I'm mad that I even had to say that, but that's how it started. And then the following year, you come back in the NFC Championship game against Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Roddy White, Tony Gonzalez, and the Atlanta Falcons on the road. You came back from down 17-0. You win that game. Then you go to New Orleans in the Super Bowl to take on your own brother, John Harbaugh, leading the Ravens, Jim Harbaugh leading the Niners, Colin Kaepernick, who's been lighting the NFL on fire with his play and his running. And you get behind big in that game. And then Jacoby Jones opens up the second half by returning the kickoff for a touchdown, and it nearly got kicked out of the back of the end zone. He took it 109 yards for a touchdown, and you're thinking, oh my God, this game is over. We're going to get blown out in the Super Bowl. Then the lights go out. 35-minute delay.
Jeez.
And you come storming back. Vernon Davis, Colin Kaepernick, Michael Crabtree, Frank Gore. You're working down the middle of the field. You get all the way down. You're about to take the lead, and you could not connect with Michael Crabtree, and you fall just short. And then the following year, you don't have as good of a regular season. The Seahawks, the up-and-coming team, they win the division, Dibs. You got to go on the road to Green Bay. You win in the frozen tundra. Then you go to Carolina. You beat the upstart Panthers and Cam Newton. And then you go to Seattle for the showdown in the NFC Championship game. And we all know, of course, how that one ended. Richard Sherman deflecting the pass away, interception to close the deal. The Seahawks go on to win the Super Bowl that should have been yours. And in that game, Navarro Bowman messes up his knee. And the next year was rough. You only win 8 games. Harbaugh's out, and then out of nowhere, Patrick Willis retires, and it's all over.
Right.
Just as fast as it started.
All over.
All gone.
Yeah.
And just thinking of how that Niners era came and went, and it's kind of bookended by the beginning and end of Patrick Willis's career, it makes me extremely nervous for this upcoming season of 49er football.
Man.
Because you never know how long this window is going to stay open for. It closed awfully shut for the last one.
The way you portrayed that, the parallel to Dre Greenlaw getting hurt, and, Navarro Bowman is kind of the Dre Greenlaw character. And, Dre Greenlaw got hurt in the Super Bowl. And I know Bowman got hurt in the conference championship game. A little bit different, but similar to where Navarro Bowman's career was never the same again. And I hope Dre Greenlaw is able to come back from this. But the parallel would be for, what you were laying out. This season would be a disappointing year. It would be an 8-8 kind of a year. And,
And then Fred Warner would retire.
Right.
That would be the parallel.
That would be the parallel.
And that sounds absolutely...
It sounds ludicrous.
Yes.
But even at the time, it didn't seem like Patrick Willis would retire. But then again, Patrick Willis did have a really bad injury. He had the foot injury, and he just could not get over it. He couldn't stay on the field. He couldn't get healthy. And you got to the end of the year, and Harbaugh left, and you thought, well, at least P. Willie's coming back. And then he decided that, I'm good. I'm going to call it a career after 8 years, and it did happen very abruptly. So you got me a little scared now when you think about it, because when you look about the parallel between those two eras, you're right, because before they went to the Super Bowl, they lost that game to the Giants. And I'll never forget that game, because I was coming back from an overnight trip in Napa with my then wife, my now ex-wife, and we're listening to the game on the radio, and I said, we have got to watch this game. So we stopped at a restaurant called the Dead Fish. I don't know if you're familiar with the Dead Fish.
I am not.
By the Carquinez Bridge, right?
Yes.
Which connects Vallejo to Crockett. Right when you come across the Carquinez Bridge from Vallejo, on your right, as you're crossing the bridge, there's this place called the Dead Fish, which is a wonderful bar restaurant. It overlooks the Carquinez Strait. And so I told my then wife, we have got to see this game. We pull off.
Pull over.
We walk right in to a 200-person Filipino wedding. So the place is just completely packed. It's a party. There's a band. There's dancing. And I'm in the bar, and I'm locked in on this game. And it's an absolute nail biter, as you remember.
Yep.
And it was just one of those crazy games where I'll never forget where I was. And you're thinking, all right, Niners, you're going to get the ball. Oh, you're not going to get the ball back. And I know, Grandy. I'm sorry, because you at the time were probably
2011,
like
I was 15.
Yeah. Which is peak, like, super fan era.
Peak, like, this
is the
game,
most important thing in my world.
The result of this game will make me happy for a year or sad for a year.
Totally, at 15. And then Kyle Williams, God love him, with a second muff punt, and the rest is history. But you think about that era versus this era in terms of lost opportunities, because that team, they had an opportunity there. And then the next year in the Super Bowl, they had a chance. And then the year after that against Seattle, you had a great chance. You had 1st and goal at the 7. You had 4 cracks from the 7-yard line and couldn't get it done. So,
oh man!
And I'm not trying to make you feel bad or other Niner fans, but
I mean,
you're drawing parallels to Patrick Willis going to the Hall of Fame and Alden Smith coming up here at the top of the hour, and it just reminds you of what you're saying, that nothing is guaranteed. Just because you have a good team doesn't mean you get to go back every year. Yeah.
Some love, by the way, for the dead fish on the text line, the Xfinity Mobile text line. Zucci Main says, driving past the dead fish right now, Dibs. 510 chiming in. It's an excellent place to eat and have a cold one. You're right, Dibs. But going back to the Super Bowl and the 1st and goal from the 7, Super Bowl wins or a touchdown wins the Super Bowl.
Right.
And you win the Hard Bowl. Jim beats John, and the rest would have been history. I remember thinking, because I think it was either a long completion to Vernon Davis down the left sideline to get 1st and goal, or maybe it was a long run by Frank Gore. But I remember thinking, Tibbs, and maybe we can blame this all on me. I remember thinking once they got 1st and goal at the 7, because they got the ball with not a lot of time and they had to go the length of the field.
I'm looking at it here. They got it back with 4:19 to go at their own 20. And they're down 34-29. You need 6.
So ideally, you would just have a 4-minute, 15-second drive. You kill the entire clock. You punch it in at the buzzer, and you win. You don't even give them a chance. And I was thinking...
Gore goes for 8. Okay. Kaepernick goes for 8. Incomplete to Vernon, 2nd and 10. Pass to Crabtree for 24. Now we're in business at the 40-yard line. Frank Gore, left end for 33 yards.
Yeah, that was it.
Tackled by Ed Reed. 2:39 to go.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, we're going to score too early, Dibs. We're going to give Flacco and Ray Rice and Anquan Bolden and Jacoby Jones and Dennis Pitta, we're going to give them too much time.
We scored
too early.
1st and goal at the 7, 2:39 to go. LaMichael James goes for 2, and they let it go down to the 2-minute warning. And then Kaepernick, incomplete to Crabtree on 2nd and 5. Niners call timeout, and that was the big one. They called timeout to...
They couldn't get the playoff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Baltimore had a chance to ramp up the D. Incomplete to Crabtree. Super Bowl over. Season over. Dream over. Grandi in his room. Door slammed. Tears
just
for sure.
Lying on the living room floor, crying.
Shout out Windsor. 3 straight passes to Crabtree. 3 straight incompletes. And the Niners... 1st and goal to 7. And the criticism then, and the criticism probably still now, is where was Frank Gore? You went LaMichael James and then 3 passes to Crabtree. You had timeouts, and you didn't give Frank Gore the ball at all. It still burns. I can see your face.
It burns.
It burns. Oh, it burns.
And that pain is very similar to the pain of what this Shanahan era team has been dealing with. Now, there are a lot of parallels as we've been laying out, and this isn't like gloomy, like because this team never got it done, this team will never get it done. There are obviously a lot of differences. I don't anticipate Kyle Shanahan driving Jed York so far up the wall that Jed York says, well, you've been highly successful, but we're going to get rid of you. I just can't handle you anymore, like is what happened with Jim Harbaugh and Jed York. Also, Jed York has learned from his experiences and is a much better owner and leader of this organization now than he was back then. So there's clear differences. And as long as Kyle Shanahan is here, Dibs, I think the Niners will continue to be a well-run and a well-oiled machine, and they'll have chances to compete. I don't anticipate this window just absolutely slamming shut like it did for the 49ers. I mean, they went from a conference championship loss to being 5-11 in 2 seasons. In 2 seasons. And then after 5-11, you were 2-14.
Right.
Off of a conference championship loss, where you went to the conference championship in 3 straight years. Once you went to the Super Bowl, 3 years after that, you were the worst team in football, 2-14.
Well, it's because of a number of factors. One, Jim Harbaugh openly and blatantly disrespected the owner, and they had a meeting, and he told the owner, this is for men only, and so Jed York had to leave, and, much chagrined, and Harbaugh alienated so many people, and he went 8-8. So then it was like, you got to go. And when
we can deal with it if you're going to conference championship games.
Of course.
But if you go 8-8,
well, he's got to go. And then their fallback plan was, not Bochy, but Jim Tomsula. So you didn't have a fallback plan. So you go to Tomsula, and then after that, again, you didn't have a fallback plan. And you went to Chip Kelly.
Go Ducks.
And go Ducks, but go home because he was an embarrassment.
He was very bad.
And not only that, but the roster had fallen into complete disrepair. So you went from, having a great team. Some of your guys aged out. Willis retires. Your quarterback turned out to be, either ostracized, not good enough, or both. Probably both, quite frankly. And you wound up with nothing. And so it was a complete rebuild by the time that Kyle Shanahan took over.
Yeah, that 2016 Niners team, do you have any idea who the Niners' leading receiver was that year? 2016.
I think that it was somebody really good, not Anquan Bolden, but
he led the 3 prior years. So he hung around for he hung around for the last Harbaugh year and then the Tomsula year, but he was no longer a Niner after that.
Oh, wow. I'm just looking at it. Jeremy Curley.
Jeremy Curley was the Niners' leading receiver in Chip Kelly's year.
Yeah, and I mean, that was whatever. And Colin Kaepernick was not great that year, but he was a lot of it was the byproduct of what he had around him. And I'm looking at the roster right now, and Raheem Mostert as a rookie on that team.
Oh, wow. I didn't even realize he was on that team.
Yeah, didn't get a lot of chances, but you had Gabby and you had basically nobody. Torrey Smith was the name I was thinking about as a guy who might have been leading receiver. But the roster that Kyle Shanahan inherited was so bad that it definitely took him some time to rebuild it, slowly retool it. Now you're in a spot where you're right, Grandy. Even if this doesn't work out this year, it doesn't feel like the bottom would fall out and, they would suddenly plummet into being a mediocre team. The roster's too good for that.
No doubt. No doubt. And, this all started by kind of reminiscing on Patrick Willis's retirement because he's about to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame tomorrow, and it's very well deserved. He retired after 8 seasons in the NFL at age 29. Obviously, the comparison for that era, Patrick Willis, this era's Patrick Willis is Fred Warner. Fred Warner, 6 years, age 27. The equivalent would be Fred Warner playing 2 more seasons and hanging it up. Like that's how shocking it was. And again, there was the injury, again, that Patrick Willis dealt with near the tail end of his career that kept him out for the majority of that last final season. And every year that Fred Warner has played, he has not missed a single game. He's played in every single game because that's who Fred is. And I'm not saying I anticipate that. And of course, I'm not even rooting for that. But these things are entirely out of the 49ers' control. And this is even before we're talking about the contracts and the money of it all. This is just individual who's maybe thinking, all right, it's all over for me. I'm going to hang it up and this thing's done. There's so many things that are outside of your control as a team that need to go right for you to have a chance. And one of those is your middle linebacker not retire a little bit earlier than you were expecting because he's the linchpin of this whole thing defensively. And as the Niners found out when you didn't have Patrick Willis anymore, suddenly that defense became really, really bad.
Yeah, and you didn't have Navarro Bowman either. So you lost both your linebackers, and that would be akin to Fred Greenlaw not coming back and then Fred Warner also stepping away from football. And just to give some perspective to Patrick Willis, we talked about him playing 8 years, 7 Pro Bowls. He was Defensive Rookie of the Year, and he was an All-Pro in 6 of the 8 years. Fred Warner, 6 years, 3 Pro Bowls, and 3 times he was an All-Pro. And this past year, he was top 6 in Defensive Player of the Year. So as good as Fred has been, and he's been very good, Patrick Willis was even at another level of how good he was. He led the league in tackles twice. And as I mentioned, he was a Pro Bowler multiple times. Pro Bowler in every year except his last year when he got hurt. So Fred Warner is a 91, a 92 out of a scale of 1 to 100, but Patrick Willis was a 98. So that's even as we compare the two, Fred Warner is he's not the same player that Patrick Willis was. Yeah. And that's no disrespect to Fred Warner. It just tells you how incredible Patrick Willis was in his 8 short years.
Man, he was so good. Like, if you could dream up a middle linebacker, you would come out with Patrick Willis. If you could create a middle linebacker in a lab, 6'1", 242, and he ran as fast as the defensive back. He could cover any receiver, most receivers in the NFL. He would just absolutely stick on any single tight end in this league. He was so incredible, and there are so many similarities between what he was able to do and what Fred Warner is able to do. But there was and this is absolutely not a knock on Fred Warner, but there was just a different level of ferocity with Patrick Willis. And he obviously was bigger and just a little more physically imposing and daunting. Fred is incredible, but you're right. Patrick Willis is just that prototypical old school gigantic triceps, biceps, shoulders, just absolutely incredible. There might not be another Niner linebacker like Patrick Willis.
Right, and a little bit of a different scheme, too. I think they ran a lot more 3-4, and this team is a lot more 4-3, and so Fred Warner is asked to do things that Patrick Willis wasn't asked to do, and, Fred now in coverage a lot more than Patrick was, but different era, certainly, in just 10 years of football. But if Fred Warner continues on this trajectory, he's got a chance to go down as a Hall of Famer, especially if this Niner team can find its way to get in a Super Bowl, the one thing that Patrick Willis was unable to get.
No doubt. I think Fred's on the path to the Super Bowl or to the Hall of Fame. Honestly, I think if you were to, try to put a percentage chance on any Niners current defenders that's headed to the Super Bowl, I think Fred has a higher chance than anybody else.
Of being a Hall of Famer?
I think over Bosa for me.
No, not me. I think Bosa has a better chance, but the hard thing about the Hall of Fame discussion in football is you only get 5 or 6 a year to go in. So even this year, when the class gets inducted tomorrow, take some time out to look at the list of guys who were finalists.
But didn't make it.
Yeah, and even guys who were semifinalists who didn't even make it to that last group. To make the Pro Football Hall of Fame is tougher than any of the other Hall of Fames relative to how many people play the sport, I think.
Yeah, and it's difficult to get in, and oftentimes you're probably left with someone who maybe you feel like should be in but isn't. But it also amplifies the meaning of being a Hall of Famer in the NFL.
Our coworker Lorenzo Neal, he should be a Hall of Famer.
The best fullback ever.
He's up there. And
he should be in.
If you look at this year, there were 7 true fullbacks nominated, and you could look at all 7 of them. Moose Johnson and Larry Centers is among them, Max Strong and Lorenzo Neal. A lot of these guys deserve to be in, but we don't look at the fullback the way we look at offensive guard and offensive tackle, for example, which is a shame.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, time for a break here on Willard and Dibs. Coming up in a half an hour at 4 o'clock, Aldon Smith, teammate of Patrick Willis's, P. Willie, going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame tomorrow. We'll talk with Aldon Smith about that and maybe reminisce on some of those memories from back in the day, comparisons of that Niner team to this Niner team, and a whole lot more. That's coming up in 30 minutes. 888-957-9570 is the number to call if you want to join the conversation. And be sure to join 95.7 The Game at Harding Park on Friday, September 6th for the Pettinelli Financial Partners Golf Tournament benefiting the Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area. Go to 957thegame.com to learn more. Presented by Atco Pest Control, the Bay Area's locally family-owned pest control company. More coming up next on Willard and Dibs.